Hey, what's up, Mike?
What's up, Monty?
Oh, hey, it's been a crazy week in America these days, or it's a crazy week in America, and I can't think of someone that I wanted to talk to more about what happened in America this week than you growing up as an Asian American fluent. I let me backtrack a little bit.
Hmm.
African American, that's easy for us. That's easy for me to understand, right? Dark skin, or you come from Africa, or people who came from Africa. Okay, we get that. Like the black skin, dark skin, but Asian American is a little bit different, right? Because
So yeah, so like here, here
how do you define that? Like how 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 is that done?
so here's the thing. Here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't get about the term Asian American. Uh, Asian American is much more complex
Yes.
than than I feel like a lot of other groups give it credit for. I think people don't really think about that much, but there are all types of layers. The first being that there are so many different Asian countries. Not to say that there aren't a lot of different African countries or
Well,
like include whatever.
it's the largest continent,
Right. But like there the thing is Chinese people, there are a lot. So first of all, like India has
and
like, and China have like the biggest populations on the planet.
well,
And
it's
within
it's almost a third of the population, isn't it?
right.
It's
And if
close.
you go to China, and there are regions in China, there are so many different types of Chinese people, regional Chinese people with all different cultures, foods,
Yeah.
and languages inside of China. And then and again, and then the same in India, you've got different, and then you go around Vietnam, Korea,
Mhm.
North Korea, South Korea, Japan,
Yeah.
and all these under the same umbrella is sort of insane to me. Like, and uh, in terms of being Asian and Asian Pacific Islander,
Yep.
and especially when you look at it in terms of Asian Americanness, because when you have people coming from all these diverse backgrounds coming to coming to America, and you just lump them all into one
So
group.
so as a what's the best way to say it? East Asian American. Uh,
Well, the thing is,
Do
it's like
do you consider like Indian Americans as Asians? Are they considered Asians, or are they just Indian? How does that work?
so here's the thing. I feel like there are three ways to sort of delineate it. There is, I feel like, in order for legislation to be passed, or for any sort of power or some sort of able to create some sort of momentum, like government wide,
Yeah.
then you need to have the biggest umbrella as possible. And so you're just like, okay, we're all Asian, so
Yeah.
let's figure out what the Asian movement can be, and then we can push in that direction. Because like maybe no one cares about Vietnamese Americans or Laotian
Yeah.
Americans or
Yeah.
whatever. But if you're just like, no, we're all Asian Americans, so we need this kind of, we want to benefit from this kind of, whether it be, affirmative action or some sort of any sort of recognition, or who knows, right? Any sort of legislative process, then the bigger umbrella, the better, right?
Okay.
But in terms of like the concept of shared struggle, there's a lot of
Oh gosh, that's
commonalities.
yeah. You comment out, but I mean, but Asian
But
history is
yeah,
super
but like
super.
it's again super diverse, but like but there's kind of like, I don't know, there is a camaraderie. But it's weird because I you know I grew up Asian American didn't include India, like South Asia,
Yeah, that's right.
essentially, right?
Yeah.
That was just me, right? So it's weird. I love the show Patriot Act with God, what's his name? Um, his name escapes me now. But um, oh gosh. But at any rate, so like but the comedian that did that show
Oh,
was
I know you're talking
he
about. I
was
know he's
Indian, I
he's
believe.
from subcontinent, isn't he? He's
Yeah,
Indian or something, right? Yeah.
I think he's I want to say he's from India,
Okay. Okay.
um, but or he's Indian American, I believe. And so he would always talk about Asian American issues, and talked,
Yeah.
basically like in a very inclusive way
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Asian Americans, including South Asian and East Asian and Southeast Asian. But like at any rate, and it was always kind of, I was fine with it. It didn't really bother me, but it was a little bit odd just because I just thought, oh, okay, well, I feel like the experiences are not that common. So in terms of the second category, is just kind of like a solidarity thing. It's like, oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. We're all Asian brothers and sisters. Sure, we're all sort of excluded in some way. Sure, sure, sure. Okay. So in that regard, I'm just like, okay, there's a little bit of this sort of
Yeah.
this that's what I mean about sort of shared struggle in terms of solidarity. It's like, yeah, we're all forgotten. We're all this middle category, right
Okay.
on, right on.
What is it?
But then the third category is just kind of like the actual like on the ground, like day-to-day life.
Yes,
Kind
that's
of thing.
right. That's right. That's what I was curious about.
And so for me, it's just like that's where it splinters even further
Okay.
because the part that gets so that I feel like most people don't understand is that there are even subcategories of like experiences day to day. So for example, one big thing is people that are born in America and raised American have a very different experience than someone that was born,
Oh,
in another country
and
and then
naturalized.
and
Yeah.
then come over to America
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
some point. And even at what stage that person comes
Yeah.
can also be very deterministic in terms of what your experience is like as
Right.
an American, as an Asian American
Yeah.
in America. And so like, and even, again, like you talk about different generations or whatever, more generations removed. But like, but you'll find that most second generation and, and beyond basically sort of act the same or whatever. But then,
Yeah. But
afterward, then that experience is very different. So for example, something that
so
one thing that I feel like people don't, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, what would you say is the percentage of second and third generation Asian Americans that actually have the opportunity to go back to their nation of origin and reconnect? Because what would your situation, your experience be more the norm or more the exception?
So I feel like my specific experience is uh, the rarity
Okay.
because so here's my so I think there are roughly three categories of Asian Americans. Even within Asian Americanness, from
Yeah.
my experience, there are three types. So type number one is we'll say is the complete duality. So full on, they are bilingual. They understand the culture and language of both, of their family's country and of America. So they're like best of both worlds type. And I feel like that's the sort of the ones that are second, third, and on and on and on. Uh, those are kind of that I feel like is the most common type because I feel like those are the ones that they basically are educated in the U.S. But to answer your question, I feel like they probably reconnect and they
Oh
have
yeah.
family and stuff like in their and home country, and so like they kind of know from experience how to integrate. So they're able to kind of
Yeah.
they're able to sort of walk both worlds seamlessly, right? I'm not in that group. So I'm in category number two, which is I am basically American and my family just happens to be from Korea. So
Yeah.
my knowledge of Korean culture and language is limited. I am like basically full on American. Like my whole culture, like the history that I know is American history. The language I know is English, and basically all my knowledge, pop culture, the music, everything that I know that is dominated by like American sensibilities. Like my connection to Korea is extremely limited, you know? And so it's kind of like, though for me, the identity is almost like zero. Like I am not connected to America because of how I look, and I am not connected to Korea because of like everything inside of me. It's not, I'm not authentically Korean. So like I have sort of zero claim to any sort of established culture, right? And then so it's two cultures, zero cultures, and then the third category is one. So basically the person that basically has we'll say in this case Korean, but just happens to live in America. So
I see what you're saying.
so
So they're
they're essentially still Korean.
Korean,
They're
just
still
living
Korean,
not in
but
Korea.
they are in America.
Yeah.
So maybe their English, their connection to America is very
That's
limited.
right.
So like, okay, maybe they have some education there. They can speak maybe pretty well, but their
The great
history, their
majority.
knowledge, their pop culture connections are all in Korea,
Yeah.
but Korea will accept them. So again, maybe all countries are not the same, but that's sort of like the breakdown, like in terms of types of Asian American experiences. And that's those are all very different.
Yes.
Very, very different, And frankly speaking, I'm not even sure now, but like when I was growing up, those three groups hated each other. Right? It's just like,
so you're saying even inside the Korean culture, right?
yeah. So if we look at just Koreans, like those three groups would hate each other. I think maybe groups one and two, like culture one and culture and two cultures and one culture, those gelled a little bit,
Be more
gelled
specific.
well.
Two cultures and one culture. What do you mean?
So for example, those that were in Korea and then came and maybe their connection to America is somewhat limited, they gel with the people that are fully immersed and fully engaged in both cultures.
Okay.
Because it includes Korea,
Yes.
right? But for for the people like me growing up without a connection to Korea or a very limited connection to Korea, if I wasn't like famous, Koreans wouldn't give a shit about me, right? Like same thing. Like look at Heinz Ward. Heinz Ward was
That's very good. That's a good point.
Like
very good point.
He is half Korean, and Koreans. I think if he went to Korea before he won this is the thing. Not even from being in the NFL. Before he won the Super Bowl, I think if he went to Korea, they would have all said,
nobody knew. Nobody
cared.
cared.
He's black.
Yeah.
He's black. We don't care about this guy. We don't care. Because he won the Super Bowl, and then you saw his Korean, his suddenly like his Korean heritage just exploded, and everyone was like, they owned this guy. It's like, oh, he's Korean and successful. We'll take him. That's the thing. That was
you should watch the I know you don't watch many sports, but they have this series on the NFL Network, and I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube by now. It's called A Football Story. You should YouTube A Football Story Heinz Ward, because they spend a good 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes in the beginning talking about his mom and his father and how he grew up and some of those difficulties. It's really enlightening because she went through She went through some stuff with a black kid.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, and that's the thing that's interesting. Again, like that was sort of like my experience specifically with being Korean American was like Koreans only cared about you if you were like super famous. Like I think like who else? There are a lot of these kinds of these stories or whatever. So like but
well,
as long as
go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say the biggest, I think that the two obstacles are language and culture. And the biggest obstacle is language. Like if you spoke Korean perfectly, then you kind of you were Korean, right?
Yeah.
But if you didn't, then you were not. Then you were not considered Korean. And so
So that means that you had a gap between you and your mother, right?
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean
your
that,
mother,
I think that's
you
one of
and
the reasons.
yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons my mom and I like didn't get along very well. Like I think she secretly resented, part of like why she resented me for a long time is just because like, okay, well,
Well,
like
you were born
he's an American kid,
eating M&Ms and Skittles, yeah.
right? And I'm just like, so I think that came from sort of a simple, like a simplistic view. Because yeah, I can't really blame my mom because she was just a regular lady. So, she couldn't have, I think her assumption was that me being in America meant I will automatically be American. And then me being born Korean just thought that would just automatically happen also, right? But
Yeah.
those things actually have to be learned and have to be acquired in some way.
So I want to ask you two questions, okay?
Yeah.
So the first question I want to ask you is, what do you think when you say the word Asian American? What do you think the average non-Asian American, black, white, whatever, Latino, when they hear Asian American, what do you think that they're thinking of when they hear that term?
I think the average person thinks of an immigrant, an Asian immigrant. So like I feel like
Asian, but remember, Asia's big. Iran.
I just so I think the average so okay, so in that regard, I think the average person would think of a Chinese or Japanese person that still speaks with an accent and but happens to live in America. I feel like that is the average person's perception of an Asian American. Um, is
Only China, Japan.
like that sort of look, like kind of
Oh,
like
okay.
the
So the
the
E's, right? The Vietnamese, Chinese,
right.
Japanese,
But
that
the
look,
thing
right?
is, from my experience, again, and I don't know, it's been a while since I've been in the States, but from my experience, it's just like, hey, are you Chinese? Hey, are you Japanese?
Yeah.
That's the go-to. And I
Yes.
feel like even if you're saying like, hey, I'm from Taiwan, or I'm from, whatever, I'm from Hong Kong, or I'm from, or
Vietnamese,
even another whole
Laotian.
other country,
Yeah.
I'm Filipino. It's like, that's not Asia.
It's
China.
like, is that part of China?
Yeah.
It's like,
It's just like,
uh,
I think the average perception is basically, and also in terms of looks, like kind of like, you have sort of, when you think of Asian, you think of like Jackie Chan, you think of kung fu movies,
yeah.
or uh or like, or some sexualized woman. So it's basically like you either have like um a a dorky dude, a
Mm-hmm.
kung fu dude, or a sexy girl, or dorky but also sexy girl. Like I feel like those are the four sort of
Yeah.
like stereotypes that you get.
Hollywood has been known to perpetuate stereotypes.
Sure.
Yes.
And so like, yeah, and I guess like there's also like the old Asian lady who's like a pain in the ass, you know. Um and but if you want to extend it, there's also, if you want to talk about like South Asia, then there's stereotype of the cab driver or the convenience store clerk or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, but ultimately, you know, the thing is for me is, it's almost always associated with an accent. It's always associated with foreignness.
Yeah.
So even when you're talking about Asian Americans, I feel like most people perceive it as you just got here. You
Okay.
came from somewhere else. You were not like the representation of someone like me is not, because people are, again, it's, I feel like it's the same knock that I feel like a lot of African Americans feel about the phrase well spoken. it's the same thing. It's like, wow, you speak English really well. It's like, hey, I was born here, bitch. Like, of course I speak English.
You speak so
Of course,
you speak so
you know,
well. You speak so well.
yeah,
You're so well spoken.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
that's the idea. Like that's, you know, the Chris Rock thing, right? But ultimately that's the idea is I, you know, it's having to defend yourself about something that is inherent. It's like, I'm an American, right? So I, you know, I am who I am. I'm just as American as you are,
Yeah.
right? I grew up in the same system, but I feel like there is that inherent foreignness to it. So yeah, so that was basically
So
that was.
so this
You had
this
two questions. Was that two? Is that
well,
two
okay, that was the
questions?
first question, but this is the question I
Yeah.
want to do, and I'm going to give you about 5 minutes because you're. I want you to like explain it to me because my experience as a Black person is very different. So
Mm.
so what is Asian American? Not what people think it is. What people's perception of it is. Like in your position, what actually is it? What is Asian American?
That's a tough question. I mean, the weird thing for me is that whenever I think about these terms, I feel like they exist only to be dismantled. Because in my mind, Asian American means nothing. It means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Like, because my experience as an individual is totally different from even my sisters, who we lived in the same house growing up, you know, and is different from any other Korean American family and any other Asian American family. Like, there are some commonalities, but not anything that couldn't be distinguished from, you know, any other family in the United States or any other family in the world. You know, like,
Yeah.
oh, we all do some of the same common things, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, the term Asian American means absolutely nothing to me. The term Korean means nothing to me. The term Korean American means nothing to me. None of those terms mean anything to me because it's just like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have any impact on my life.
Yeah.
Except for, in college, I read some Asian American literature, and, I felt like some of it resonated with my life, just in terms of different types of information, different struggles,
So
different
do you
experiences.
consider people from the Middle East Asian? Or are they Middle Eastern? Is that the same?
Me myself, no. Like, I mean, like I said, for me, I don't even consider South Asians as Asian American, right?
Okay.
I guess, what was it?
So you would call them what?
Yeah.
South Asians? Or you just call them by
Yeah.
the country? So like
I
people
mean, like,
from people from Malaysia. They're what?
so that's the thing. It's
Well,
like, for me,
South Asian?
I so this might sound like a cop-out answer, but for me, I'm just like, I try not to use those terms at all
Yeah,
until I hear a person themselves identify as X,
that's right.
So like, if
Well
I
said.
if I encounter someone and they say, hey, I'm Asian American, and it's God, I was hoping I could conjure that comedian's name again, but I couldn't.
Oh,
But like,
the one,
and if it's
the Patriot Act
Patriot Act
comedian,
guy,
right?
I wish I was trying to, like, if I could conjure the name right now, it'd be perfect, but I couldn't. But like, oh, uh, but at any rate, yeah, if that person says I'm Asian American, like, all right, I'll call you Asian American, because that term means absolutely nothing to me. I'm not precious about it, because who cares?
Yeah.
Just because I was younger and I thought Asian American only meant East Asian,
Yeah.
so that doesn't matter. Like, if you want to call yourself Asian, it's honestly the same way that I feel about gender now. It's just like, if whatever you want to call yourself, I don't care. It doesn't affect me at
Well,
all. So if you want to be called they, if you want to be called he or she or they, I don't care. If I accidentally say, like, she, when you consider yourself he, okay, sorry. And then whatever pronoun,
well, but
whatever
that's
floats your boat.
something that happens with Black Americans because, like, I mean, as a Black American or African American, I
Right.
mean,
There's that thing with Kamala Harris. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
she's
Well,
not from Africa.
not
She's
just
from Jamaica.
not just Kamala Harris, but Barack Obama, right? Like their
Sure.
their lineages, they are traceable. They can say my family's from here and from here, but
Sure.
the majority of, I mean, when you have a last name of Jackson, like you know people who had last names of Jackson and Washington and go down the list. Like those were not very nice people. Those people did stuff to black folks. So it happens in the black community too. It's one of the things about being American is those labels. The labels are going to have to go sooner or later. They got to go.
Again, yeah, like ultimately I feel like those are constructs that are supposed to be dismantled at some point. Like, I mean, look at there, basically now it's almost entirely voluntary for like Irish Americans and Italian Americans and like basically they can just call themselves Americans and it's fine. And no one really cares because I think they enjoy all the rights, that come with being American. Whereas Asian Americans are still considered other citizens, so like basically in that regard, like I said, going back to what we talked about before, in terms of actual like legislation and government sort of like equity, then in that regard, it's important to consider everyone in that same sort of boat.
Yeah.
But ultimately, in the end, you want to deconstruct all those terms in the end, But for now, it's just like, like it's sort of it's again for me meaningless. It's meaningless.
Well, by definition in America, it should progress to meaninglessness, right?
Yeah.
All right.
That's the theory, at least.
Well, hey, Mike, that was a good one. That was a good one, Mike.
We can put a button on it now.
Yeah. So, what button? What are you talking about? All right, Mike. That was nice one. Well, we'll have to get back together and talk about some other stuff later. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right.
See you on the next one.
All right, later.